Thanks everybody for coming today, for sitting in on our latest webinar program. Today, as you know, we're going to feature the one and only Yeosh Bendayan from Push Button Creative Audio, who's going to share with us his wisdom, his tips, his trends, his tactics, and his tricks for the giving us a great look into podcasting and client branding through podcasting. I'm only working with one monitor, so I'm going to switch over, share my screen, do a little intro.
Oh, I get an intro. Wait, do I get an intro?
I'm giving you a little bit. Hang on.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
So we are AAF Orlando. You are tuned in to our program for today. A little bit about us. As everybody pretty much knows, we're a member of the AAF 4th District, which includes the entire state of Florida and the Caribbean. So we're a good large district with some great clubs. We have two organizations, AAF Orlando and Add to Orlando, which is for younger professionals. If you're in business, then you're in advertising. So as we all know, advertising supports every line of business that there is. We are the gasoline for the economic engine. I believe Yeosh taught me that one. We want to thank our sponsors as always. So these special sponsors: Push Button Creative Audio, Outfront Media, Concrete Line Pictures, Adrenaline Films, and PR Breakthrough Boot Camp from AMPR. Most of those folks really were a great help to us so far this year, especially with the American Advertising Awards presentation. And Concrete Line is a great partner of ours right now on the Ad Vanguard series that you'll be seeing more of as this year goes by. So thank you all sponsors. And if anybody's out there that would like to be a sponsor or ask about what it is to be a sponsor, we would love to talk to you. So that's all the introduction I have for AF Orlando. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Yeosh Bendayan, a partner at Push Button Creative Audio. As most of you know Yeosh and John, and you know Push Button. They have been a mainstay in Central Florida for years, and both Yeosh and John have been incredibly active in the American Advertising Federation through the Orlando Club, through district, and up to I think national too. Yes, Yeosh?
Yes.
So you two guys have been unbelievable champions for the Federation, the Orlando Club, District 4, and for the Orlando creative community as well. So as always, thank you very much for all of that effort and all of that work. So I'm not going to take any more time. Here's Yeosh introducing your clients to branded podcasts. Let me get my stop share going.
And I'm
Go ahead.
Share mine. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all being on. I will say part of what Terry talked about here in representing our local clubs, one of the big things that we do is, of course, the American Advertising Awards. And I will tell you that for those of you who have entered the award show this year, at 1 o'clock, you will winners of all the winners of the District 4 level of the competition for the American Advertising Awards will be getting notified of their silver and gold wins today at 1 o'clock. So those will actually be coming from me directly. You'll be getting an email. They're already set to launch. So even if this runs a little bit over, you're going to be getting notified of all the wins. So hopefully keep an eye on your email. We're also going to be doing a big best of show finalist announcement on April 16th that I'm sure Terry and Chris will be keeping you guys informed on. But today we're talking about branded podcasts. And this is a presentation that I've probably given 30 or 40 times in the last year. I feel like every week I've got 2 or 3 of these presentations, just because the interest in podcasting has gotten so big over the last 3 to 5 years, really. And for those of you who are on that maybe don't understand podcasts, you're here to learn a little bit about what that is. Part of this presentation is tailored to you. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of background information as to why podcasting is becoming such a big trend. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the process of developing the content, how you should figure out what makes sense for you. And then I'm going to give you some ideas on how you could pitch this internally, or if you're an agency and you're thinking about pitching a podcast to a client, I'll give you some ideas on how you can navigate those waters as well, because it is kind of a bigger, more complex thing. And if you've never had a background in media production, it's pretty heavy. So we'll cover everything, but I will tell you that I'm going to be going a little fast. So at the end of this, I'm going to be sharing my slides with Terry and Chris and Ralphie, and then they will be sharing that with you guys. So don't feel like you need to write all this stuff down right now. You can absolutely get the slides later. Just kind of listen and feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll address those at the end. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. Here's a couple things to know about me. I think Terry covered most of this. I'm a partner here at Push Button Creative Audio. We're based here in Orlando. So it's kind of a delight to actually be able to present to folks that, we know, because usually I'm presenting to like somebody in Wisconsin that I can't really talk to outside of this. But we've been developing creative audio for 15 years. We got into the podcast space about 3 years ago. And we've been developing podcasts for brands for, pretty much in those last 3 years. Pre this company, John and I had a background in radio, so producing and developing radio shows. So we've obviously kind of brought that experience into developing podcasts. We've been industry recognized for as long as we've been in business. But today I want to talk about an audio first format, right? Consumers are becoming more and more engaged with audio first formats. If you think about the way that we engage with even at-home devices, Alexa and Google and stuff like that, we are becoming more attuned to the fact that devices are listening and they are becoming a part of a central focus of our life. So it stands to reason, I think, when you look at the media landscape and what the digital revolution has done over the last 20 years in taking print digital and then taking television and creating a digital space for it, first through YouTube and then through all the streaming services. As audio producers, we knew that this day had to come where there was a audio equivalent of that, right? Where we took radio and more than just streaming Pandora, Spotify, we knew that there was going to be a play for the storytelling space within an audio platform. So it stands to reason that podcasting was going to come along. It actually took a lot longer than I think most of us expected. 2020, by and large, most people would consider the year of the podcast, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get into some of the statistical data, but really what you need to know is that the upswing in podcasting started right around 2012, 2013. That's when the data indicates that we started to see an upswell in mostly college-age listenership. And as those trends continued after their college years and they began introducing an older generation to podcasts, is what we're seeing now is a big adoption of the podcast listenership trend among demographics that are 45 plus. It's very similar to what we saw with social media trends in 2005 and 6, where, folks in college, right? Those were my prime college years. It was just college kids getting into Facebook. And then we took those trends with us post-college, and then all of a sudden granny's got a Facebook page. So what we're expecting is that over time, that demographic that has money is sorry, millennials, the demographic that has money is going to be listening to podcasts more and more. And we'll see how advertising is responding to that in some of these statistics that we're going to be covering. On average, Americans are consuming about 52 minutes of audio every day on their mobile devices, right? And that could be everything from Spotify, Pandora, that could be audiobooks, that could be, any number of different audio exclusive channels. But almost an hour of audio consumed through mobile devices a day is pretty significant. I think anybody would attest to that. We've got over $1 billion in advertising spends on podcasts in 2020. If you look at the trend line over the last 5 years, the number, I would say about 2016, 17, we're about 100 million. So it is almost 10x in the last 5 years in terms of the amount of spend that advertisers are doing through podcasts. There's about 100 million Americans that have listened to at least one podcast a month. It's a full third of the country. There are a lot of folks who consume significantly more than that. And there's a lot of folks who still have yet to be introduced to the medium. If you look at general podcast listenership ages as it currently stands, that 25 to 34 demographic is still the largest. However, the largest growth is in 45 plus, so 45 to 64 and even older than that. And as it becomes more a part of our day-to-day life, what we're seeing is that podcasting is going to be more of a research tool, just like going to Google and searching for how to repair drywall returns a video. We're going to see Google is actually changing algorithms as they always do, but they're modifying algorithms to start picking apart podcast content so that you'll be able to actually call on a specific clip of a podcast will be returned as a search result. So for those of you who are in the advertising space, or if you're an agency and you're thinking like, is this really relevant to my clients? Well, if the digital platforms that they're on, if Google and Bing and Yahoo and all these platforms are a big part of how they, develop new business, then yes, over time, over the next few years, the content generation through a podcast space is going to be important. And the earlier you get into that, the better Google is going to be able to index you and make sure that you're returning high on those results. So it's at least something to have on your radar starting now. It may not be something that you're thinking about starting right away, but within the next year or two, again, if you've got those clients who are really heavily focused on SEO, SEM, podcast content is going to become another white paper, YouTube video podcast, and they're going to create the content into text, make that text searchable, and start serving those results. So where are people listening and who's listening? Really, the gender cut here is pretty much 50-50. And it's pretty representative of the US population as a whole. And where people are listening, I think the majority of you, just like I, before really researching this stuff, thought that the majority of people were probably listening on their way to work. But the reality is that the majority of listening is occurring in the home. And if you think about it from a perspective of sensory engagement, it makes a lot of sense. You can, do the dishes, cook dinner, help kids with homework, fold your laundry. These are all things that you can do and have podcasts on in the background. And what we're finding is that a lot of folks are opting to have Alexa play a podcast versus having a television on in the background, and just for white noise, or because they want to follow a cooking show or whatever it is. But we're finding that at-home listenership engagement is higher, particularly through the pandemic. We have seen a sharp rise in at-home listening, but even pre-pandemic, these numbers were fairly high as well for at-home listenership. Of course, en route is going to be one of the top things. People listen at work. I don't know how, but fine. You want to listen to This American Life at work. That's up to you. I can't do it. I need to focus. More than half of Americans listened to podcasts monthly in 2020, which is obviously significant turning point in that it has become part of the mainstream. And of course, we see that most folks are listening to entire episodes, or at least most of episodes, which I think from a content standpoint is often a concern. It's like, sure, we're getting a lot of clicks, but are people actually engaging? We're seeing high levels of engagement. Now, you can argue whether it's passive or active engagement. I would say you could probably estimate that the majority of these are passive engagements. Whether they're actually focused on a lot of the content is probably some statistical analysis that still remains to be seen. But we are seeing that almost 20%, almost a full fifth of folks are increasing their playback speed. I don't know that everybody's aware of this, but of course you might be. YouTube allows you to increase your playback speed, and so do podcasts, right? I would say this, in my estimation, is kind of a millennial and Gen Z thing, where we increase our playback speeds because, like, come on, like, let's go, let's get to the point. So if you're not doing this, I would actually encourage you to try it. It's one of the things that we do for pacing, even in post-production, where we'll bump up somebody's speech pattern by 5 or 10% because it makes them sound more exciting. So, this is something to be aware of if you're generating content, even on YouTube. The majority, or not the majority, but a full fifth of folks are actually speeding up that content. So, hurry up, say things faster. We don't have time. So an average podcast listener is listening to about 7 shows a week. They've got 6 subscriptions. A subscription is just like a YouTube subscription. So for the uninitiated, you find a podcast you like, you subscribe to it, and then you get push notifications on your phone that says, hey, there's a new episode available. So that's how you're growing your audience, right? You really want to grow your subscription numbers so that every time you post a new episode, you're growing an audience larger and larger. Currently, there are, and get this, so this presentation was updated, I want to say I updated this in late January, nearly 1 million active podcasts. And I actually just heard yesterday that the number is now closer to 2 million. So that is how fast new content is being generated on these platforms. However, by comparison, if you look at what's active on YouTube right now, about 37 million active channels, over 600 million active blogs. So, folks will say, isn't there enough content in the podcast space? My answer is not even close, really. Truly not even close to as much content as could be available out there. The key thing to remember is twofold. One is, your target audience or whomever you're trying to serve through your podcast, are they underserved? And two is how much of this million podcasts or 2 million podcasts are actually well produced, well researched, and well done. And the majority are not. And if you've ever gone on an Apple podcast, like just kind of search and tried to find some new stuff without getting recommendations, it's a nightmare. It's like trying to find, a random show on Netflix. Like occasionally you turn one on, you're like, how is this even on here? I don't understand. It's so bad. But the same applies with podcasts. Anybody can make one. So, anybody does. And then you get a lot of stuff that is garbage. So yeah, the number sounds high. 2 million podcasts sounds like a lot, but the reality is we're only starting to scratch the surface with the amount of content that can be created on these platforms. We've seen a dramatic increase, 27% in 2019. The pandemic months clearly led to a huge uptick in podcast production, as we're seeing now, with a doubling of our total active podcasts in just a year. So let's talk about motivations, right? And I hear this a lot. Why would I want to listen to a podcast? What makes it like something that people are doing? What's the attraction here? So this is as a result of a survey. This is what people have mostly said. People are using it as a way to relax. And, those are your typical entertainment podcasts, murder, I killed somebody podcasts. There are about 3/4 of folks saying that they're looking to learn something more about a topic. So this can be continuing education for work. This could be, they're trying to learn how to garden, right? Type stuff. And they don't want to necessarily, or they don't have time to watch a gardening show on TV at home, but they certainly have time to listen in the car, right? They are trying to stay up to date, right? Current on news and events. And these are your Apple News podcasts and your NPRs, right? And then ultimately for inspiration, which is kind of a catch-all, right? They're trying to get motivated to do something or to become better at something, start a business or whatever. So what is truly making them convenient is that they require no visual engagement, first and foremost. Of course, because you're creating content that is specific to you, we find a lot of niche stuff is being created, right? So not only niche, like hyper niche content is being created, but it's also creating these online communities of folks who are interested in the same thing. And then there's, of course, the ease of being able to transfer it from home to work and into the car and to wherever you are, and not have to re-engage with a different device, right? So you're basically able to carry it forward. And of course, all of the platforms that are available, there's just such a proliferation, even in the last 12 months, of new platforms, from Pandora to Spotify. Of course, there's Apple, there's the Android platforms. There's tons of platforms. Google's got a really good one. We'll cover them a little bit later on in the presentation as well. So the ultimate question here is, should you make a podcast? Should your client make a podcast? Is it something that you think is going to benefit you? Well, here's a couple of reasons why we think most folks in a branding position should engage in podcasts. First of all, you're going to help engagement, right? It's going to be engaging that core audience, right? So if you've got brand loyalists, this is giving them the kind of engagement they're looking for. It's direct access to you and your brands, and the things that interest you are likely going to interest your loyal buyers, right? It's going to increase awareness, yes, about products and services, but not as much as you might expect, because ultimately the point of creating a podcast, everybody starts with, great, we can sell product through there. It's not really it's not really designed for that. Podcasts are designed more in the PR social sphere than they are in the direct advertising sphere. So you're creating content that is interesting and engaging for your consumer, almost regardless of whether or not it is of interest to the brand itself or is self-serving. And I'm sure most of you who are creating content, this mid-length content or longer content, will understand this. You're trying to engage an audience in whatever manner they want to be engaged in, not necessarily in the manner you want to engage them in. And we'll talk about that a little bit too when we get into the how to create content for this. You're able to position yourself and your team as experts. This is, again, a direct pipeline from your internal organization to the consumer's ears. So it allows you to use the resources that you have within your four walls and to give the audience something that they want and position yourself as an expert. You're increasing your audience knowledge. You're dispelling rumors if that's an issue that you have within your organization, because, again, you're directly communicating without needing to go through media. You're establishing trust because you're building a one-to-one relationship. And of course, again, your PR and your social teams will be happy because now they'll have content to tweet out and also to share through press releases. And, there's more to it than just your sort of standard stuff. Podcasts are requiring active listening. And this is, again, something that is a great research tool, like we talked about earlier when we talk about Googleability of podcasts. So there's 4 types of brands that we say podcasts make sense for. So your lifestyle brands, niche brands and products. So think, just as a broad example, if you're thinking about the automotive category, right? And your Toyota, very utilitarian brand, very broad. Being a Toyota driver doesn't necessarily elicit some sort of a lifestyle to you, right? But being a Subaru driver, being a Jeep driver, right? These are lifestyle brands that make sense because you've got a sort of set of shared values among your audience that you can make some pretty generalized assumptions of that within them. Now, if you're not a lifestyle brand, I will encourage you to look within your brand at niche brands. So, for example, if we go back to that Toyota example, Toyota's got TRD trucks, right? So your Toyota Racing Division trucks are definitively a line of trucks designed for a certain type of, person who likes that sort of thing. And so that makes sense now. It's like, okay, well, maybe we don't do a broad-based podcast based on our umbrella brand, but hey, we've got this niche that we serve that we really feel we could give them some additional content. That makes a lot of sense. Organizations with an educational mission makes a lot of sense for it. Now, typically, we will recommend that educational-based podcasts go for the microcast format. These are shorter, 5 to 15 minutes. And please, if you're going to do this, check out what's already available. We work here with a lot of financial services companies. And so one of the big things for us is we get our clients calling and say, I want to do a podcast. I want to teach folks about financial independence or whatever. There's so many podcasts out there for that already. I mean, you've got, even on a national scale, Clark Howard and Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey. And, for the most part, 95% of folks in the financial services space agree with what those folks are saying. So if you're going to get into doing an educational-based podcast and you're going to microcast, find a way to do it that's unique and different and offers some kind of a different perspective or format or style that is unlike what other folks are doing. And that's where I would focus my attention. Like, yes, this is the content we want. Great. How are we going to do this in a way that's not already being done? Because you're just going to become one of a sea of millions of faces, right? It also makes sense for organizations that are looking to take a stand on an issue. So if you've got a brand that, for example, if you've got a brand of sunglasses, Costa, right? Costa sunglasses. If you wanted to make a podcast about ocean cleanups and, environmental protections, like that makes sense because that aligns with your brand. If your brand is affiliated with a political movement or something like that, that certainly makes sense for your brand to delve into that as a podcast. What you don't want to do is take an audience that maybe, your Publix and decide that you want to make a podcast that takes a hard stance on a political issue, if that's not something that you're on the record with, of course, maybe reconsider that. So if you've got a brand that already leans into a certain political, social, or environmental stance, that can make a lot of sense for you as a secondary mission. It's a perfect thing to do a podcast about. Organizations looking to connect with, that should say consumers, generally looking to connect with consumers, creating additional content for them can make a lot of sense. You just have to know what you're trying to get out of it before you get started. So there's 5 things that we're going to need for a great podcast. And guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pick up my pace a little more. So in order to make time here. So there's 5 things you need for a great podcast. It's the tech, the idea, your process, your platform, and of course the metrics. We're going to cover these 5 things as quickly as we can. The tech, look, here's a basic list of stuff you need. You can take a look at this later. Here's what you're all asking. How much does this cost? And so I can tell you, you can get a relatively decent consumer grade podcast setup, probably around $700 to $1,000, right? That's fine. If you're doing like, a reality TV podcast for yourself and you just want to talk about Real Housewives or whatever, The Bachelor, like if that's what you're going to do, 700, $1,000, you probably get everything you need here and you're fine. If you are trying to podcast on behalf of a brand, you need to hire a studio. That's what I'm going to say. But aside from that, let's say you've got an audio person on staff and you just want to build a decent studio in your space. I would say $3,000 to $5,000, probably enough for a decent 2 microphone setup. That's, if you're trying to ballpark a budget, that's where I would be. But engage a studio if you can, because ultimately it's less about the equipment and more about who's running the equipment and can they do it. All right, so let's talk about your idea. Most of you on this probably have some kind of an idea of a podcast, or you're thinking that you might want to do one. I can't tell you what your podcast should be about, but I'm going to give you some things to think about and organize your thoughts in a way that maybe you'll be able to come out of this with some concept that works for you. Obviously, first thing you want to do is define and segment your audiences. Identify who the podcast is for within the segments and who it is not for within your audience segments. Then you're going to want to look at those audiences and figure out what they're looking for. And this is where it's a great opportunity for you to engage your PR and social teams. Your social teams basically to say, what of our social posts are getting high engagement, right? Your PR teams to say, what of our press releases is getting high engagement? And using that and going then and talking to your webmaster, maybe saying like, what of our blogs and our white papers are getting good engagement? What are people looking for? Basically, if you've got an SEO team that does a lot of keywords research for you, finding out where those keywords, those most active keywords are within your audiences, that's a great place to start. Next, you're going to want to develop your broad goal for the show, right? And this is a two-way street. What are we trying to give the audience? What are we trying to get from the audience? So identifying both of those things at this point. Then establishing your metrics of success. Do you want 1 million listeners or do you want the right 500 listeners? Establish what success means to you now and let that guide your decisions into making your podcast and developing your content instead of launching a podcast and then being disappointed you don't have 1 million listeners, because maybe that's not what you need, right? I think most of us in the advertising space get that. Identify individual episode topics at this point. So now, you've done all of that sort of initial research, and then you're trying to establish your broad-based goal for the show. What is the main subject heading here? And then we're going to try to break this down into individual episodes. And then once your first season is done, and we'll talk about seasonality here in a second, surveying your audience, and you can even survey your audience pre your first season, just to identify what content it is they're looking for. You might be surprised. The content they're looking for might have nothing to do with what you do, or it might have a lot to do with your secondary missions, right? You may have a secondary mission that you have been thinking about for a long time. Like, I wish we could do more with this thing that we do on the side. This might be a great opportunity to lean into that. Here are your basic podcast formats. this is another way to identify some opportunity for figuring out what the show is going to be about. And just very quickly, your monologue, as you all know from doing Shakespeare in high school, is a single person format. Look, honestly, most people can't do this. I would avoid you to stay away from a monologue. Your multi-host format, 2 or 3 hosts could be individual segment hosts. It gives you a little bit of something to hang on to. There's a personality, conflicts, there's arguments, there's debate. It's more fun. And it gives your audience an opportunity to build a relationship with a couple of hosts, right? That audience member becomes the unofficial third in that, right? So you see that a lot with morning radio. Your interview formats are, of course, more Oprah style, which is great. I will encourage you to get interview training. Interviewing, especially interviewing on microphone, is a trainable skill. So it is something that you need practice at. Most people don't have the natural ability on camera or on microphone to ask the right sorts of questions, but you can learn that. That's not a problem. Roundtable conversational is going to be more like a panel. And the only thing I will caution with here is if you're going to do a panel, remembering that there's no visual cue. So voices can get confusing if you have too large of a panel or if you have voices that are too similar. So remembering that if you are going to do a panel, making sure that you're keeping distinctive voices and that you're finding ways to identify people and opinions in ways that's not going to confuse the audience. And finally, your narrative and your documentary storytelling. This is going to be where advertising lives. This is the fun, sexy, cool stuff that we all love to listen to. But it is so expensive and so time consuming to produce. I would say if you're getting into a podcast on behalf of a brand and you don't have really solid resources to do it, I would probably stay away from this. And that's not a blanket statement. That's sort of generalized, like you may be able to do it, but look, you're going to already need a lead producer on your staff who's coordinating and organizing, and we'll get into that in a second. But if you want this narrative and documentary storytelling, you need to work with an agency. Or if you are an agency, you need to bring in the folks that really know how to tell stories with an audio only platform, because it's very different than visual storytelling. Remember, all these formats don't live in a vacuum. You can mix and match formats. You can have parts of your show that open with a multi-host, then you can go into an interview format. Maybe you have a very small narrative or some sort of storytelling component on as a segment of your show, but it doesn't become the whole show, right? That might be a way to reduce the burden of doing something like that. The 5 most popular searched podcast topics are these, right? Society and culture, business, comedy, news, politics, and health. So this is what people are searching for. I'm not saying anything here other than look at this list. If you've got something that falls into one of these categories, hooray, there's something for you there. You can also look at ways of mixing and combining these things to create something new, a format that maybe ties 2 of these things together or brings in something that you do and ties it into one of these things. So, spin your brain on that a little bit, maybe figure something out there. The things that you'll want to do in picking a topic or examine your mission and vision. Of course, you want things to align with your mission and vision. You want to consider what types of special access you have available. I think as advertisers, we have pretty cool jobs. And many times we have access to lots of things that we think are just kind of mundane, that the majority of folks would not think is totally mundane. So remembering the types of special access to people, places, events, things that you can use and leverage into creating a podcast, giving people that special access is something they can't get elsewhere. So it makes your podcast now, it gives you a USP, right? It gives your podcast a USP. So what thing or experience are you trying to give the listener? This is, again, what we talked about before. And what are you trying to get back from your listeners? Critical question to ask anytime you're picking a podcast topic. You want to make sure you're not negating a desire or a need from either side. It has to be a transactional relationship that benefits both of you. Most successful podcasts should root themselves in their organization's mission, offer a distinctive voice or some kind of a perspective that's not already out there on 100 other podcasts, fulfill a desire that target audience has. You're leading the horse to water, right? In most cases with advertising. In this case, you're letting them lead you. You're letting them tell you these are the kinds of things that we want out of what we're searching for already. We're going to give it to you, and we're going to wrap it in a branding that is familiar for us, right? And finally, you want to provide insight and access to the consumers that they couldn't otherwise easily have. What you do not want to do is be inconsistent, and that is messaging, that is delivery, that is content. You don't want to be unoriginal. You don't want to deliver the same content as others, and you don't want to have low production quality. Obviously, I'm an audio producer. I'm going to say that, but it's true. You don't want to have low production quality. Remember, people stick earbuds in their ears. You're basically in their brainstem. If you've got clicking, popping, hissing, sibilance issues, anything, like, they're not going to give you a chance. They're not going to ever get to listen to your message because you're going to turn them off within the first minute. So definitely invest in production quality. But something I want to say here, and I know we're running low on time, but something I want to say here about delivery. Most folks get into blogs, white papers, podcasts the same way. I'm going to deliver an episode every week. I'm going to deliver an episode every month. This is a terrible idea. Do not do this. I would highly recommend you create seasonality to your shows, particularly if you've got a marketing department that has a tendency to get overwhelmed or get super excited about an idea only to 2 months later not be that excited about that idea. So if you've had a blog unsuccessfully start and stop, the best way to do this is to focus a certain window of time in the year. Pick a time of year where maybe you guys aren't as busy. Say, okay, 2 to 3 months. We're going to focus and we're going to create 10, 12 episodes of a podcast. We're going to create a full season. And then we're either going to release it one at a time, or we're going to release it all like Netflix style. Here's 12 episodes, go nuts, do your thing. But you're promising the audience something that you're delivering on, right? You're saying, hey guys, we're going to do 10 episodes. And every episode of that podcast say, hey, we got, 6 episodes left. We got 2 episodes left. On that last episode, you say, hey guys, this was great. Thanks for tuning into season 1. We'll be back next year with more. Whatever. But you're establishing to the audience that there is a finite date where you will stop that season's production. If you have the bandwidth and can start season 2 right away, great. If you need some time off, that's fine too. Come back next year, develop a second season, but do it all at once, because promising your audience that they're going to get a new episode every week and they don't is just going to burn your audience. You're going to spin your wheels. It's not worth your time. I'm going to breeze through this. I will tell you there's a lot of information about to come up here on the process. Sorry for all the text on screen to all the graphic designers in the room. I don't know what to tell you. There's a lot of text. Very broadly, there's 5 phases of production. Phase 1 is preseason. It's all the things we just covered. Broadly, what is your show about? All the branding elements. Phase 2 of production is your pre-episode. This is where you need a producer to help you figure out who you're interviewing, what you're asking them, doing pre-show interviews, assembling all the parts and pieces to get ready to record. Phase 3 is your recording phase. This is where you're getting into actual fun stuff. This is where everybody wants to hang out and be in the studio and look cool and take photos for Instagram. By the way, make sure you get photos for Instagram. Phase 4 is your post-production. This is arguably one of the larger phases. This is where your producer comes back in, helps you assemble the show and figuring out what works, what's not working, and correcting things that need to be corrected. Phase 5, your show launches, your post-show launch. This is where you're engaging with your audience on social media. You're trying to figure out, metrics and whether it's been successful, and then generally trying to figure out what you're going to do in season 2. So those are your basic 5 phases of production. If you want to read the details, again, I'm going to be sharing the slides with you guys and you'll be able to dig into that. In terms of platform, Apple's podcast platform is going to be the easiest and the best. I would encourage you to also look at placement on Google. You've got these other platforms as well. I'll recommend the service here in a second that you guys can use, that we use for ourselves when we post for our clients. In terms of money and metrics, making sure you're creating that PR plan ahead of the show, working with your PR teams, your social teams. You have to grow an audience. It's not just about putting together content. There needs to be a plan to grow an audience. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can purchase advertising on other similar podcasts that have audiences that are similar to the ones that you want. You can record some of the filming process, include it on your social channels. You can buy Facebook space if you want to promote the content through Facebook or through LinkedIn, depending on the audience that you're trying to attract. Make sure that you're setting up your RSS feeds. These are all basic things that are a part of an initial launch of a show that help you grow that audience to the critical mass that you need for it to be successful. In terms of tracking your listeners, I'm going to recommend this service here, Captivate.fm. I think it's $20 a month or something like that for the basic pro grade or whatever. It'll help you streamline the process. It's going to take you a little while to figure out the platforms and getting all that stuff on there. I'm happy to help you out. Reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat box here in a minute, and we can help you figure this stuff out. But this is not hard. But Captivate.fm is a really good opportunity for you to streamline the process. If you're looking to sell ads on your podcast, check out Advertisecast. It's a sign-up service, easy to do. If you're looking to buy ads on national podcasts for any media buyers that are here, try Midroll. You probably know about this already, but generally most of the major podcasts are on there. The general ad types that you can expect to get are what you would expect for any digital platform, with that live read being the gold standard, your recorded reads being secondary, and post-roll, you might as well light your money on fire. Nobody listens to the ad at the end. So 5 final quick tips for you. Put together a dynamic team on air. Don't just rely on a single person. One of the biggest questions I get is, what do I do if the CEO wants to host? My advice is, haha, good luck with that. No, my advice to you is to schedule for a handful of folks within, if you really want an internal host and you don't want to hire out, finding an opportunity to do a screen test for everybody and having them come in and host a mock episode. Many times, if your CEO really wants to do it and he's really not good, hopefully he is self-aware enough to listen back to himself and go, wow, I really suck at this. But if he's not, or she is not, then I don't know what to tell you. So good luck. It's not paying my check. Hire a company like ours and we'll tell them. That way you don't have to. That's probably the best way to do it. Create segments that involve your listeners. Your listeners are what's going to help you grow your audience. So you can do this a number of ways. You can do engagement through Facebook polls that you then talk about on the show. You can invite listeners on as co-hosts. You can have them be part of a call-in. You can do a lot of things. Involve your listeners. That the show is really about them. Look for guests that have already followings within your target demographic. I know this seems to make sense, but when that guest show is going live, make sure they know so that they can help promote the show, right? Invest in production quality. Duh, of course I'm going to say that again. And then finally, be consistent. Create content ahead of schedule. If you're doing stuff on a rolling basis, try to stick to at least 30 days out from when your next episode. Try to have stuff ready 30 days out at least, because otherwise it's just traumatic. So that's all I got, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. I'll take some questions, and I'm going to type my email address in here so you guys can send me questions if you don't want to ask in the open. So thanks.
Yeah. So Yeosh, one of the questions is, what's kind of like the optimal timing for a podcast? How does someone start to make that kind of best
timing in terms of length of how long should my podcast be?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a common struggle with any sort of format where you don't have a hard out time. So I'd say most people are expecting engagements of about 30 minutes. If you are doing more of a storytelling or narrative thing, you can go up to an hour. If you're doing educational based stuff, I would recommend you to keep it 5 to 15 minutes and no longer than that. But always err on the side of being shorter. I think that's true for pretty much anybody who's involved in editing. Keep it shorter, keep people wanting more, get them to click into the next episode. If there's something that you talked about that they really truly love and you seeing a ton of engagement, split that into a new episode, create a new episode for it. That's the best. So I think you don't run the risk of under informing. I think you run a risk of over boring people. Yeah.
Not what we're going for. So, so what are some of your favorite podcasts?
I always get this question.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And,
So guys, here's the thing. I work on podcasts all day. Okay. I don't listen to podcasts. I'm sorry. I have a couple that, of course I listen to This American Life. I've got a couple of like, the Scrubs podcast just because I really loved Scrubs. Like there's a handful of like little ones like that on occasion, but I get hit with so many folks being like, listen to the podcast I'm making that, whether I'm doing it for clients or other stuff. Like I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And I know that's, for most folks, they want to run up and talk to me about podcasts after a presentation. I'm like, man, I'm so sorry. I'm not the person for this.
Well, I'll give my personal recommendation only because I listen to it daily is Marketplace from NPR.
Oh my God, yeah.
They are obviously on NPR in the evenings, but if you don't get a chance to listen to your radio, or if you're not driving, as I am not as much as I used to, I listen to Marketplace every day, and it is a phenomenal sort of it's a business economics show, and it's great. Highly recommend.
For sure.
So question, what is the best strategy to mitigate production costs with sponsorships? We need to just have some burn until we have an audience and metrics to present to potential advertisers.
Yeah, so it is going to be a little difficult for you before starting a show. We've had this exact issue with some different organizations, particularly like some nonprofits that maybe want to start a podcast and they're trying to find a way to get it done inexpensively until they get sponsorships. Typically, what you can do is if you can find somebody to underwrite the first season, give it to them at a really good deal. Just say, listen, all we're trying to do is get you to underwrite production costs, or divide the episodes up and get underwriting for individual episodes. It's probably the best way to do it until you have metrics. And even then, to be honest, your first season metrics are probably not going to be that great because you won't have enough of an audience. And you'll see if you're creating evergreen content, and this is what I would tell your sponsor. If you're creating evergreen content, when somebody finds you in season 5 and they love your stuff, they're going to go back to season 1 and they're going to keep listening. So that content is always going to be available as long as, it doesn't go out of date or something doesn't change and you have to pull it. But, it is the kind of thing where if you're going to be doing this long-term and the content's always going to be good, it's an opportunity for them to get additional listenership long-term. And you may want to even consider making it time bound. You may want to say like, hey, we'll give you first season sponsorship for a year or for 2 years. And then at that point you can resell. If you're still getting great engagement on those early seasons, you can resell sponsorships and just repackage that content with new sponsorship messaging in the future.
Super smart. Another great question. So our podcast in Spanish well received, or is it mostly an English-based platform? How and why and should we focus more on bilingual content?
I don't have information related to that. Sorry, Marcos. I don't have bilingual data for it at the moment. I can tell you that we have never been approached about starting a Spanish language podcast. That's not to say it's not being done, but I can look into that. That's a very good question that I honestly had not considered it up until right now. So I will look into that and I'll reach out to you, Marcos. I'll send you an email on it.
Clients starting to ask for it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they are. My first question is going to be what kind of engagement is the Latin American market having is the Hispanic market having with podcasts? I would imagine it's very similar trends to what's happening with, and usually more. I find that Latin American and Hispanic communities are much quicker on the uptake with a lot of trends and technology. So it's very possible that the numbers are even better. But, I know broadly in Latin America, I travel down there frequently. I have not heard much in Latin American markets about podcasting, how American Hispanics are engaging with the platform. Unfortunately, I don't have that split out.
I imagine probably the biggest challenge would be if you have to do essentially your podcast twice, once in English and once in Spanish. So yeah. That would be a very cost prohibitive sort of entry point. So you'd almost have to choose maybe, but it'd be worth doing the research on.
Yeah, I mean, it is cost prohibitive, but if you've got folks in the studio already and you manage to hire bilingual hosts, I mean, yes, you're talking about like double the editing and probably a little more time for recording, but you're only doing the bulk of the work is research. And I'm telling you, people underestimate this so often when you're producing content for a show. Like they think the show making is the hard part. The hard part is the stuff you do before the show making. If you do it all well in the pre-production, then your actual recording should be a breeze and editing should be easy. But the problem is people don't do the stuff up front. They get into recording and then they record 4 hours of audio for a 30-minute show. And then it's like, oh my God, then it takes an eternity to get stuff right. But if you get it all right on the upfront, I think you could probably do it, let's call it 30 to 40% more cost to have it done in a second language would be my estimate.
That's a good guess. I had a question for you. So what do you wish someone would do that they're not currently doing in the podcast space?
Like a show idea. I have a couple show ideas that I don't know that I'm ready to give up. Okay, I'll give you guys.
Daniel just asked the same question. What is a crazy podcast ideas you had that you wish someone would do, or that never?
Okay, I have an idea for one. I don't know that I'll ever be able to do this. I have an idea for one that I call Keep in Touch. And do you remember in high school yearbooks, people would write KIT?
Yeah.
And this is what I want to do. I want to take people and I want to open their yearbooks and I want to find somebody that said keep in touch. And I want to call them and I want to record that conversation. Like, I just think that would be like, hey, you told me to keep in touch. It's been 30 years.
That's amazing.
So what's going on? And then I want to hear stories about things that happened in high school that they were like afraid to tell each other. I want to air all the dirty laundry.
That's great. Do you feel like almost any brand, we've just got a couple minutes left. Do you feel like podcasting is right for almost any brand, depending on how they're going to do it?
I don't think so, man. I don't know. I think that the brands that are getting into digital, that are heavy into digital and reliant on digital to grow their sales, kind of has to at this point. I think, like if you're a retail store and you're in a mall, I don't think you need a podcast. If there is a desire for more information, if your audience is looking for, I struggle with this because I've had the arguments where it's like, look, if I make hammers, do I really need a podcast? Do I really? And there are folks out there that will tell you, yeah, for a number of reasons, there are enthusiasts, there are hammer collectors out there that really want this sort of content. And sure, maybe you don't get a huge number of listeners, but man, the people in the hammer community are really going to love it.
It's huge.
It's huge, right? It'll become the biggest thing. I want to hammer.
Yeah. And I imagine that, just only because I have, as you were talking, this was a great presentation because it was very it had a lot of ideas for me. There are some clients that it may not seem obvious, but It doesn't mean that you can't do one or two and you can use them. It doesn't, it may not warrant an entire season worth of hammer podcasts, but it might be a really interesting one or two off that you just sort of promote individually. So I think to your point of this presentation, setting expectations clearly, having clear goals and metrics of success can tell you whether you need a bunch or just one.
Right. And you can always host, you're right. You can always put a couple podcasts on your website, right? You don't have to load them up on the platform. It could be part of your, part of your hook into your getting folks to contact you, download our podcast on this or that information specifically that you're looking for. And also, as Daniel, who's commenting here, will attest to, you got to test your formats. You gotta try out, shows sound great in theory sometimes, and you lay it out and you're like, oh, this is not good. Or, I know Daniel and I had worked on a couple podcasts last year, and there was a couple we laid out and we're like, this is not working, man. This is not good. Exactly. Truth for sure. So you really want to lay stuff out before you're investing, huge amounts of time. You can do one episode. You can record one episode. Now it's going to take you a long time to get all those parts and pieces together because, doing 10 episodes of something is infinitely better on average, per episode than just doing one of something. But I think it's important to get it done, get one episode done, listen to it. Is it entertaining? Is there enough content there? Is it working before doing the rest?
Awesome. And at the end of the day, and I can say it because you can't really just call push button and set up an appointment with them and talk through what they can do and how much it's going to cost you, and don't do it yourself because that's just going to go wrong. I
appreciate that. The reality is there are a lot of great audio folks out there, and you can do this on your own. And I'll tell you, they're so involved. We are only taking on 10 new podcast clients this year. That's it. We've already signed on 3. So, you know what I mean? Like there is such a huge demand for podcasts that I'm not necessarily worried about scooping up business. I would love to have more here in Orlando because our clients are California and points west. So it would be awesome to have folks who could come in here and record because we've got a great podcast studio. But you know, ultimately, even if you just want some advice, you've got my email address. I put it in the chat. Ask me questions. I'll give you advice on equipment and whatever you need at no charge. Just because you guys are so great.
Super cool.
Exclusive for AAF Orlando members.
Exclusive for our today's participants.
That's right.
So Terry, anything to wrap us up?
Well, okay, thank you. Just Yeosh, thanks so much for that.
For sure.
That was really super, of course, informative, and we really appreciate that level of detail.
Yeah, man.
And information for this, you know, excellent. So I think everybody who's listening got a lot out of it. We'll also make it available on our website, and for further listening, we'll promote it via our social channels. So, you know, just great content for us. And but again, I second what Chris said. If anybody is interested in doing a podcast, just talk to the experts, Yeosh and John, and they will take care of you greatly. So thanks again, Yeosh, for today. Thanks to you and John, and for all of your service to AAF.
Anytime.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And we're going to look forward to having you participate even more.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
All right. Everyone for listening. We hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.